He has a bachelor's degree in education from the University of Kansas and is currently a businessman in Kansas City, Missouri. He serves as an assistant to the auxiliary board of the faith in that area. And his subject this morning is Queen Marie of Romania. And it is a slide presentation. So, Mr. Postlethwaite.
Thank you. I'd first like to thank the association for including me in their program today. And without going into the background of this, due to lack of time, I think we'll go ahead and get started. It'll be too dark to take notes, so just sit back and enjoy this. So if we can have the lights, we'll go ahead and get started. Bahá'u'lláh was exiled in 1868 to the prison city of Akka by a decree from Sultan Abdul-Aziz. About the time this illustration of Akka was made in 1868, within these prison walls, Bahá'u'lláh proclaimed his mission to the kings of the earth. He addressed them all: Queen Victoria, Napoleon III, Tsar Alexander II of Russia, William I, King of Prussia, Francis Joseph of Austria, and Pope Pius IX. Only two of these sovereigns were addressed by Bahá'u'lláh in a favorable way. Queen Victoria he commended for having forbidden the trading in slaves. And Bahá'u'lláh acknowledged to Nikolaevich Alexander II, the all-powerful Tsar of Russia, the aid extended to him by his ambassador in Tehran. Little did Queen Victoria know that by the grace of God she was spared the sad fates of her fellow rulers. Nor could they both have known that they would be blessed in 1875 with a precious granddaughter, who in the 20th century was to become the first reigning monarch to serve the very cause of the author of those letters. Little could they know that this radiant queen alone among her sister queens would be moved to spontaneously acclaim the greatness of the message of Bahá'u'lláh and proclaim his fatherhood and commend the Baha'i teachings to all men and women. Who was this queen of Romania, this queen all but forgotten by time, but in her day was renowned for her beauty and charm, her kindness and humanity, who was extolled as a great queen, who one writer said, "In all the world there is no queen so queenly as her"? And how did she come to recognize Bahá'u'lláh and come to deserve, as the Guardian has written, the rank as the first of those royal supporters of the cause of God, who are to arise in the future, and each of whom is to be acclaimed in the words of Bahá'u'lláh as the very eye of mankind, the luminous ornament on the brow of creation, the fountainhead of blessings unto the whole world? For us to understand the significance of Queen Marie's recognition of the faith, we need to go back in time and understand her background, her position in Europe, and her remarkable and extraordinary nature. Even as a princess, Marie was no ordinary member of royalty. She was the daughter of the Duke of Edinburgh, who was the second son of Queen Victoria. Here he is in Russian costume. And her mother, former Grand Duchess Marie Alexandrovna, was the only daughter of Russia's Tsar Liberator Alexander II. So Queen Marie was born into an exalted position, rare even for those days when royalty was at its height. As a child, Princess Marie not infrequently visited Queen Victoria at Buckingham Palace, where other members of royalty were gathered too. You can see Queen Marie, or Princess Marie, at the bottom of the slide here, sitting right in front of Queen Victoria. And to this powerful queen, Marie was little Missy. And to this little girl, this great queen of England, this seemingly stern, strong-willed woman who literally struck fear in the hearts of people, to her, Queen Victoria was just plain grandmama. Marie grew up in this rambling gray mansion known as Eastwell. It was set in an English park where magnificent old trees grew well apart in great stretches of grass, where herds of lowing cattle grazed while deer scampered away into the woods. You can imagine the life of a princess. carefree, happy, protected from life's hardships. And so she was raised along with her sisters, and as an adult, she remembered so vividly people and places of her childhood. In one of her books, she told of one little boy who made quite an impression on her. This little boy, standing here at the very top of the stairs, she described in this way. He was red-haired, freckled and impudent, with a fine disdain for authority. We had a sneaking liking for each other. At first, we did not dare show it openly, but by degrees our red-haired guest threw away all pretense and brazenly admitted his preference for me, declaring before witnesses that when he was grown up, he would marry me. That little red-haired freckled boy was later to become Prime Minister of England during one of its darkest hours. That boy was Sir Winston Churchill. By the age of 15, she had associated with the great and the near great of Europe. She had attended balls, did everything you'd expect a young, beautiful princess to do. She had also acquired a love for riding horses. And when she wasn't about her princess duties, she would mount her favorite horse and ride through the countryside. And of course, when she reached the age of 17, there was talk of marriage. And some thought that she would marry George V and become the next Queen of England. Even Queen Victoria had hoped that this would be so. But Marie's mother would have none of that, partly because the two were first cousins. And instead, saw to it that a young Romanian prince, Ferdinand, and Marie saw a lot of each other on her trips to Munich, Germany. And there the two became engaged. They were married in a church adjoining this great German medieval stronghold on January 10th, 1893, a year after Bahá'u'lláh ascended. That day, bells pealed outside her window as maids dressed her in a white silk wedding dress. And of course, much of the royalty of Europe attended the wedding, and afterwards celebrated the marriage in a festive banquet in a huge glass and steel amphitheater built just for the occasion. At 9 o'clock, the newlyweds left the castle for an evening sleigh ride across the moonlit snow to a honeymoon home nearby. After the honeymoon, they were off to Romania. She didn't take to Romania at first, so far away from her beloved England and her dear close sisters. And at the birth of her first child, at first, only made her feel trapped and used. After all, she was only 18 and came to a strange Eastern European country with so many strange customs and ways. But gradually, as her family grew and she became accustomed to her new home, this queen with so much energy, so much charm, so much life and vitality learned to love this beautiful area of the Balkans, and especially to love its people. And the combination was ideal. It was electric. Often she would don authentic peasant costume, mount her favorite horse, appropriately named Airship, and ride among the Balkan mountains visiting the village people along the countryside. But all of this was short-lived. The war came. And even in 1913, at the early rumblings of the war, she was affected, so much so that she calls it the turning point of her life. The Romanian troops were drawn into the Balkan campaigns, and many were wounded. Red Cross hospitals were set up along the Danube, and while still a crown princess, and ignoring orders that no woman should cross the Danube to the hospitals, she did. She walked among the wounded, comforting, cheering, unmindful of the cholera epidemic. And of this experience she said, "It was my first initiation into suffering on a large scale, a thing never before known, heard of no doubt, but as something far away with which I should never have anything to do." But this was only the beginning. Her great hour as a woman and a queen came when Romania entered the war in 1916. The record and stories of her selfless deeds during the war are too numerous to recount here. Unfortunately, only a few can be touched on. How in Bucharest, The capital was being bombed daily by the Germans, and hundreds were being wounded in the streets daily. She threw open the palace doors and called in, "Bring them in." And the royal palace from then on was a hospital. Or how, during the final days in Bucharest, before it fell to the enemy, her little Marcia, her youngest child, fell victim to typhus and meningitis. And how, even in her grief, she went on comforting, serving, helping other mothers' sons, all with a deeper understanding of their loss in time of war. How in Jassy, where the government had been moved by train, in this city, which normally held 70,000 people, had become crowded by over 1 million souls during the coldest winter in Romania in 50 years. How she set up bakeries to counteract the famine in the city, sewing machines in the royal residence to turn out garments for the hospitals, rode on horseback to all the hospitals along the front, all under her direction, visited trenches in the face of bullets, cheered the troops, all along all fronts, visited the sick and dying soldiers. In spite of highly contagious typhus and cholera, nothing stopped her. She was completely tireless. At first, literally, no one could keep up with her, and finally, men were assigned to her in shifts. A Virginian gentleman, Colonel Joe Boyle, was found who could keep up with her. But his chauffeur finally came to him and said, "Maybe you can keep up with her pace, sir, but I can't," and he resigned. And this is how she always was during the war. Without the least reservation, she gave of herself fully, fearlessly, constantly, and joyously. And even after the war, as she tried to piece back together her torn country, she kept up the pace. She toured the countryside from dawn until after sunset, visiting each village, cheering her people, handing out Red Cross clothes, and everyone loved her. Getting ahead of myself here. One said of her, "When our Queen comes, it is like Christmas." One of the most poignant pictures of her came at this time when she was going about her relief work. An old woman, sick in rags, miserable, came forward to her when she was handing out clothing in a village. Her eyes were dimmed with tears and her body bent with disease. Pellagra, a disease caused by malnutrition, had claimed her. She lifted her rags to show Marie the ugly marks of the disease. The two, both dressed in peasant clothes, Marie in her fresh ones, and the old woman in her old worn ones, they looked at each other. Someone tried to pull the lady away. Instantly Marie stepped forward and drew her back to herself. "Majesty," she said, and she pulled from beneath her skirt a soldier's cap. "I have brought it to you. A battered old soldier's cap, a gift fitting for a queen?" A boy of 14 laughed. Surely the old woman was mad. Again Queen Marie leaned forward and drew the old woman to her. They sat there, the aged head on the bright blouse of the Queen's arm around her. The Queen took the battered cap as if it were the most precious gift she had ever received. And she talked to the woman of her boy and her country and gave her back the cap to keep as a memory of him and of herself. She then placed a huge bundle of clothes in the woman's arms and dismissed her with a smile. Her country healed, and in fact grew to be the second largest country in Europe after the war. Then, only a few months before her trip to the United States, this great queen of faith and courage discovered something very precious to her, the Baha'i faith. She set sail for America in the fall of 1926 aboard the luxury liner, the Leviathan. And as correspondents covered her cruise across the Atlantic, they sent reports back to the States, which appeared in all the major newspapers and magazines across the country. Americans increasingly anticipated her arrival. After all, not only was she renowned in Europe, but she was the first queen to be a state guest on American soil. And no one looked forward to her stay more than the Queen herself. She was anxious to see this country, and especially to meet its people. And America welcomed her with open arms. When she got here, her first words echoed the very words of Abdul-Baha about women's role in bringing about world peace. "I am interested in the position of women in America and their work for world peace," she said. "We've all had enough wars, haven't we? I am confident that women will end all wars." After a pause, she added, "if they do not quarrel among themselves first." The New York Times was full of pictures of her arrival at the docks, her stepping off the ship, the parade in her honor through downtown Manhattan and the New York Public Library, and at City Hall. Front page headlines read, "New York gives hearty welcome to Queen Marie," and "Ovation in fog stirs royal visitor." Even Will Rogers had a thing or two to say about her. He said this, "Welcome to Queen Marie, bless her heart. Americans will always owe her a debt of gratitude for running Peaches and Amy McPherson back among the one-heads. Yours for credit where credit is due, Will Rogers." You remember Peaches and Amy McPherson? Most people don't. Amy McPherson, shown here in the middle, was the California evangelist who everyone thought had been kidnapped, but who had actually run away with her radio operator. And Peaches Hennon was a 16-year-old girl who was to marry the wealthy old codger Edward Browning. Both of these stories, with all their various details, had been on the front pages for months. And what a relief it was, at least to some, when Queen Marie came to the United States and was on the front pages for most of her trip instead of them. Of course, the President of the United States couldn't let a reigning queen come to this country and not extend an invitation to her to visit the White House. And so, a day after her arrival in New York, she arrived in the Capitol. Calvin Coolidge received her at the White House, and they visited for 5 or 10 minutes. Then Queen Marie and the President and the presidential party all piled in their limousines and were off to a reception at the Romanian embassy. It was a visit that lasted just as long. And it was a protocol to exchange visits like this then. And that evening, a formal White House dinner was served. And Will Rogers had a few comments to say about that event too. "I can just imagine," he said, "when the President and Queen Marie sat down to the dinner table. I don't know, but I bet they sat there a long time, and then Cal said, 'What country are you from, Marie?' Then the next day, she was off on a royal train for a 3-month tour of the country. First, she went to West Point to review the cadets in the rain, then to Annapolis at the Naval Academy. Then she crisscrossed the country up to Canada, where she visited Montreal and Ottawa. In Ottawa, a day before her 51st birthday, she attended a reception at the newly finished Parliament building. And I'm going to digress here a moment from the script. There was a lady that traveled with her and wrote a book about her visit afterwards, and it is in the Ottawa Library here. And in this book, she described the reception for the Queen at the Parliament. And she said that it was just like going back to Buckingham Palace in England. She said that the Canadians out-British the British. Of course, that was back then. After Ottawa, they went on to Winnipeg, and then over to Montana and Idaho, on through Nebraska and Illinois. She met mayors, governors, senators, the wealthy, but she always had a love for the people. Repeatedly, she told her hosts that she wanted to meet the people. And they certainly wanted to meet her. The Blackfoot and Sioux tribes made her a member of their tribes. The Sioux gave her the Indian name Wiyan Kapanpiwin, which means the woman who was waited for. She met with farmers in South Dakota and cowboys out west, and here she is in the middle wearing a big white 10-gallon hat and standing next to that horse. Someone said she's a real buckaroo there. In Chicago, her visit was cut short by the sudden illness of her husband back in Romania, and she immediately returned home to be with him. He passed away very soon after her return. 3 months later, on October 5th, 1927, Martha Root had her second visit with Queen Marie at this castle in the Transylvanian Alps. This palace was near Bucharest, where Martha was lecturing on the principles of the Baha'i cause and writing her customary articles for the newspapers. The Queen, still in mourning for her husband, was not receiving guests. Yet she made an exception in Martha's case and invited her to visit her at Palliser Castle in the small town of Sinai. When Martha was ushered into the Queen's drawing room, near where this picture was taken, she noticed several Baha'i books laying on the table and sofa. Queen Marie had sought comfort in these and had been reading the writings concerning eternal life. Martha brought the love and sympathy of the Baha'is, and the Queen, in turn, extended her love to the Baha'is and to Shoghi Effendi, the greatest holy leaf, to Abdul-Baha's widow, the Holy Mother. She also expressed her hope that one day she would visit the holy shrines. Martha had brought along a precious gift to Queen Marie from the Baha'is of Mashhad in Persia that may have looked like this. It was an illuminated prayer of Bahá'u'llah's with a lock of his hair in the center. Queen Marie was so delighted with this gift that she had a special frame made for it and placed in it a small photograph of Abdul-Baha. After this, Princess Elena, the youngest daughter of Queen Marie, and her younger brother, Nicholas, entered the room. Elena asked Martha downstairs to her sitting room for a visit. Martha noticed a small photograph of Abdul-Baha on Elena's table, and most of the Baha'i books published in English. Elena told Martha of her plans to translate Baha'u'lláh in the new era into the Romanian language. Martha also heard about the fine response Elena had received from a member of her court when she had given them this book. A little over a year later, on January 18, 1928, Martha arrived in Belgrade, Yugoslavia, after traveling in Greece. Queen Marie and Elena were there too. The Queen was visiting her son-in-law, King Alexander II, and her daughter, Queen Marie Mignon, at the birth of their second child. Princess Elena sent a note to Martha from the palace. "Mama and I would be so glad to have you take tea with us at 4:30. It was on this occasion that Queen Marie gave Martha a very precious gift. When Queen Marie was a young woman, her royal relatives in Russia, shown here in old Russian dress, had given her a beautiful brooch. It consisted of 2 little wings of wrought gold and silver, set with tiny diamond chips and joined together with 1 large pearl. Marie picked up the brooch and held it in her hand. She looked at Martha and said, "Always, you are giving gifts, and I am going to give you a gift from me." And with great delight, she pinned the brooch on Martha's dress. Martha did not keep the brooch for herself. Instead, she gave it as a gift for the construction of the Mother Temple of the West. The Friends at the National Convention that year raised the question, was it right to sell this brooch that had belonged to the first queen who had ever served the Baha'i faith? After some consultation, they decided to sell the brooch. Because of the urgent need for funds to continue the construction, it was purchased by Mr. Willard Hatch, a devoted Baha'i from Los Angeles. In 1931, when Mr. Hatch made his pilgrimage to Haifa, he carried this precious brooch with him to the World Center, and there, with the permission of the Guardian, offered it to the archives to remain there forever. Martha's 4th historic meeting with Queen Marie and Princess Elena took place at one of the Queen's favorite places in October 1929. Modest by comparison to her other palaces, the Queen designed this lovely home and had it built in the small, quiet town of Balsik on the Black Sea. She named it Tenya Yuga, a Turkish name which means a solitary nest. Martha was invited to lunch along with several other guests. After the meal, the Queen and the Princess led Martha upstairs to a spacious room overlooking the sea. Martha extended greetings from Shoghi Effendi and Baha'is everywhere. The Queen expressed her heartfelt desire to travel to the Holy Land to meet Shoghi Effendi and Bahia Khanum, and to visit Baji and offer prayers at the shrine of Bahá'u'lláh and at Abdul-Baha's resting place on Mount Carmel, the most great prison where the Holy Family had been confined for so many years. She told Martha, Elena and I will go to Egypt and Palestine this winter after the New Year, and we shall surely go to Haifa. Also on this occasion, Queen Marie presented Martha with a signed photograph of herself to give to the guardian. As planned, she and Princess Elena made their trip to the Middle East. When the guardian was informed of this, he immediately wrote instructions to the Baha'is of Tehran to prepare a gift for her, the tablet that Bahá'u'lláh had sent to her grandmother, Queen Victoria, and copied in fine Persian calligraphy and illuminated. During her trip, the guardian received no word as to whether or not she was coming for sure. Twice in March, he cabled her and received no word back. Finally, he learned that she had actually sailed for Haifa from Egypt. 2 days after this, he received a cable from the Romanian minister in Cairo that read, Her Majesty regrets that not passing through Palestine, she will not be able to visit you. He was not telling the truth. Shoghi Effendi learned later that the Queen and Princess Elena's ship, the Mayflower, had actually docked in Haifa. And as they left the ship, they were prevented from staying in Haifa and from going to Mount Carmel, which may have looked like this then. And the two were led to an automobile and rushed out of Palestine to another Middle Eastern country. Rahia Khanum recalls in her book, The Priceless Pearl, how Shoghi Effendi, a number of times, had described to her how the greatest holy Leaf had waited for hours in the Master's house for Her Majesty and Elena to arrive, but they never came. In June 1931, the Queen wrote to Martha Root describing a little of what had taken place. Both Elena and I, both are shown here in Turkish dress, traditional Turkish dress. Both Elena and I were cruelly disappointed at having been prevented from going to the holy shrines and from meeting Shoghi Effendi. But at that time we were going through a cruel crisis, and every movement I made was being cruelly exploited. Every movement I made was being turned against me and being politically exploited in an unkind way. It caused me a good deal of suffering and curtailed my liberty most unkindly, but the beauty of truth remains, and I cling to it through all of the vicissitudes of a life become rather sad. In the early 1930s, Martha Root was in Vienna, Austria, on 2 occasions to teach the faith. On August 8, 1932, and again in February 1933, Queen Marie and Elena, now Duchess Anton Modling, received Martha at Elena's new home, Sonnenberg, outside Vienna. On one of these occasions, Queen Marie made her now famous statement used as a frontispiece of the Baha'i World, Volume 4. She said, the Baha'i teachings brings peace and understanding. It is like a wide embrace gathering together all those who have long searched for words of hope. It accepts all great prophets gone before. It destroys no other creeds and leaves all doors open. Saddened by the continual strife amongst believers of many confessions, and wearied of their intolerance towards each other, I discovered in the Baha'i teachings the real spirit of Christ so often denied and misunderstood. Unity instead of strife, hope instead of condemnation, love instead of hate, and a great reassurance for all men. And again, in 1934, on February 16th, Martha was received by Queen Marie at her beautiful Controceni Palace in Bucharest. Martha described her, how beautifully she looked that afternoon, as always, for her loving eyes mirror her mighty spirit. A most unusual queen is she, a consummate artist, a lover of beauty, and wherever she is, there is glory. She received me in a private library where a cheerful fire glowed in a quaint built-in fireplace. Tea was served on a low table, the gold service set wrought in flowers. Queen Marie's first volume of her autobiography, The Story of My Life, had just been published in the United States, and excerpts of it had appeared in the Saturday Evening Post. It was an instant hit. In fact, her book set a new trend in autobiographies and won critical acclaim. One reviewer even compared her to H.G. Wells. Queen Marie remarked to Martha that she was deeply touched by all the letters and notes from people of all strata in the United States and in other countries. She also told Martha that while in Hamburg, Germany, on her way to Iceland, she was driving through the streets. A young girl threw a note to her which read, "I am happy to see you in Hamburg because you are a Baha'i." Then she added, "In my heart, I am entirely Baha'i." Martha had her 8th and last meeting with Queen Marie on February 4th, 1936 at the Controceni Palace again. Perhaps it's significant that Martha saw Queen Marie at this time, for 1936 was an extremely difficult and sad year for the Queen, for many people in her life she so dearly loved had died that year. And she could sense that very soon her country would be faced with a severe crisis, one that it most likely could not survive. The meeting took place in her softly lighted library at the palace. It was 6 o'clock in the afternoon. The Queen was deeply concerned about the increasing danger in the world and wanted so much to help bring about the unity of hearts. She told Martha of the Baha'i books she had been reading, and she was impressed at the depths of the Kitab-i-Igan, an illuminated page of which is shown here, and the wonderful gleanings from the writings of Bahá'u'lláh. About gleanings, she said, even doubters would find a powerful strength in it if they would read it alone and would give their souls time to expand. During this interview, she promised to send Martha another testimony for the frontispiece to Baha'i World Volume 6. Her appreciation echoed the grave crisis the world was facing at that time, in 1936 before World War II. It read, "More than ever today, when the world is facing such a crisis of bewilderment and unrest, must we stand firm in faith, seeking that which binds together instead of tearing asunder. To those searching for light, the Baha'i teachings offer a star which will lead them to deeper understanding, to assurance, peace, and goodwill with all men." She spoke fondly to Martha of her dear childhood friend, Miss Lillian McNeil, who was then living near Akka at Bahá'u'lláh's home of Masreye. They both had recognized Bahá'u'lláh separately and independently. During the last few years of her life, Queen Marie often corresponded with her old friend. One of her last letters to Mrs. McNeil read in part, "I lead a very quiet life. My household has become small, but I have the feeling of being well loved in the country. My people and I are old associates. We have shared good and bad through 43 years, and that counts." The two old friends were both looking forward to a reunion in 1938 in Haifa. But the Queen's health was failing, and the conditions in Palestine were becoming more dangerous. That year, Queen Marie passed away. Lillian McNeil wrote about her passing, "The world is poorer for the passing of such a noble lady, and a blank impossible to fill is left in the lives of those who knew her personally." "Hand to the cause of God," George Townsend later wrote of her passing, "Her death and obsequies were attended with all the ceremonial that befits the passing of a queen." Then he continued, "But who can tell what was the greeting that awaited her on the other side, where she learned in an instant how true had been her intuitions of the manifestation of God, and where she saw, unobscured now by any mortal veil, the white eternal splendor of the truth that she, alone among the earth's queens, had arisen to proclaim." The guardian gave us a glimpse of the blessedness that was hers when he said, "Queen Marie's acknowledgement of the divine message stands as the first fruits of the vision which Bahá'u'lláh had seen long before in his captivity and had announced in his Kitab-i-Aqdas. How great," he wrote, "the blessedness that awaits the king who will arise to aid my cause in my kingdom, and who will detach himself from all else but me." Thank you.